We are now 160 days away from the midterms, which President Donald Trump apparently is not worried about. Watch what he had to say in a cabinet meeting called to discuss negotiations with Iran.
They thought they were going to outweight me, or we'll outweight him. He's got the midterms. I don't care about the midterms. Look what happened last night. That was the prelude to the midterms. People understand it. They know that, very simple, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
So what happened last night? Well, Trump-backed State Attorney General Ken Paxton won the Republican nomination for Senate in Texas. He will face Democrats' choice state lawmaker James Tallarico in November, who kicked off his first rally of the People versus Ken Paxton tour in Houston tonight. Well, there we go. With that, folks, let's bring in our nightcap. With us tonight, we have Kayla Gardner, MS Now White House correspondent. David Drucker is here, senior writer at The Dispatch. Democratic strategist Joel Payne. He was also a senior aide for Hillary for America and press secretary for former Senator Harry Reid. And Angelo Corazon, president of Media Matters. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Joel, there's many places we could start. I want to start with Trump and Paxton here. Look, primaries are a thing. One thing, a general election, as we all at this table know, is a whole nother. What do you make of the Paxton endorsement? I know folks have made a lot about the fact that he's a criminal. He has a mugshot. But the voters in Texas, they knew that. And they have voted for him multiple times anyway, 2015, 2022, and then again in a primary the other evening. What do you make of this matchup and what the Tallarico campaign came out with tonight? Yeah,
well, I wish that all the voters had the same values on this that we do, Simone, but about 70-some-odd million voters voted for Donald Trump. He got a mugshot, too. Related to Texas, to your very good question, here's how I think about, what's going on in Texas. So, look, MAGA, it's very clear to me, is not a political movement. It's beyond a political movement. It's a lifestyle brand. And Ken Paxton is a very good mascot, a very good avatar for that lifestyle brand. He is, above all else, loyal to Donald Trump, which is the first and most important principle of MAGA. He will do everything Donald Trump says. He will offer no resistance. And it adds to this drumbeat of Trump getting behind these loyalists in the last 6 weeks, whether it's supporting Julia Letlow in Louisiana versus Bill Cassidy, going after the state senators in Indiana who challenged him on some of the redistricting work he was trying to do, and so on and so forth. Republicans around the country. It's because Donald Trump and Republicans view their strength as holding that MAGA base solid and allowing no distance between Trump and that base. So I think what Donald Trump, by supporting Ken Paxton and pushing John Cornyn to the side, is saying is loyalty is the first and most important and only thing that matters. And I think whether or not that is at the behest of the goodwill of Republicans in the Senate and then the House, it doesn't matter, because all that matters is what's good for Donald Trump.
David, what is your take on that? There are all these conversations about the rifts that are now exaggerating, that are now being exacerbated between Republicans, specifically on Capitol Hill, given the president's endorsements. But my intel has said that the reason the president really ended up endorsing Ken Paxton is because he believed he was going to win anyway, and he wanted to be on the right side of the win, even though Ken Paxton, to your point, was very loyal. He was one of the folks that helmed one of the lawsuits in 2020, specifically against Pennsylvania. What is your take on what's going on here?
Well, first of all, you're right. Your intel is correct. Ken Paxton was going to win that race. I mean, the polling that I was privy to, private polling in advance of the race, told me that Ken Paxton was going to win no matter what Donald Trump did. I mean, 30 points, which is about what he won by, a little bit less than that, but close to that. That wasn't all Trump. This wasn't like even Steven and Trump plus 30 all of a sudden. Paxton was going to win, and Trump didn't want to be on the wrong side of that. And so he went with the winner. Number two, I think we have to understand that all of your points are apt, many of them. But John Cornyn no longer embodies the kind of Republican that Republican primary voters in many states, particularly Texas, want. Right? When he was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2002, when he was elected state attorney general in 1998, he embodied the kind of Republican that Republican primary voters wanted. John Cornyn has not changed. The voters have changed. And one thing John Cornyn could not compete with was that Ken Paxton had been impeached and nearly removed by a Texas legislature that's overwhelmingly Republican. Now, people kind of, snicker when I say that, but what I mean by that is that just like Trump, a lot of Republican voters in Texas said, here's a guy that they came after him. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. Even if it is true, he didn't care. He took the heat. He stuck around. He fought through it. That's the kind of person that I want. That's one of the reasons I like Trump. I want somebody who will fight no matter what. It's how they looked at him. And by the way, a lot of Texas voters that voted for Ken Paxton don't live their lives like Ken Paxton. And a lot of these people haven't had multiple extramarital affairs, haven't been accused of bribery or misusing, their place of business. They haven't been cozy with a bunch of donors and shady business deals.
They haven't had their staff call the FBI and say, hey, something shady is going on here.
That too. But as a matter of politics, they said, John Cornyn wants to govern more than he wants to fight. We want somebody who wants to fight more than they want to govern.
One thing I want to say about Cornyn, though, is a reality check is he has voted with the president 99% of the time. He's been an incredibly loyal soldier to President Trump. He has also talked about naming a highway after the president. But as you mentioned, I think Trump just wanted to get behind a win. This was very last-minute primary endorsement, very unlike his decision to go after Thomas Massie or Bill Cassidy. But one thing I'm really watching from Cornyn now is, does that change for his remaining months in Congress? He has come out and expressed some concerns about the DOJ's anti-weaponization front. He has also not outright supported the White House's request for security funding for the ballroom. So that is certainly something that I'm watching. And the fact that the president made this endorsement is frankly angering a lot of Senate Republicans who felt like he didn't need to. Paxton was going to win anyways. And yet he decided to make this and possibly make his time harder in terms of working with the Senate for his remainder of the year. Yeah.
Angelo, you are someone that I feel like has a very good window into what conservative media is saying, but also how this plays into the playbook that Republicans have been laying out over the course of the last, I would argue, 10 years. What is your take on this? But also, let me just throw on the table the retribution angle. There are many things that the president promised on the campaign trail that he has not delivered on. He said no new wars. He said he was going to lower prices on day one. Prices are up. We are in another new war. Today, apparently, Pete Hegseth said we now got a war on the cartels, child, just all the wars. But the president did on the campaign trail promise that I would be your retribution. Now, maybe Senate Republicans didn't understand that he was talking about some of them.
Yeah, I don't think they did. I mean, what I think they thought was that he was going to own the lips and go after the deep state and go after, pedophile rings. And that's clearly not what he's been doing. And, it's not just that he talked about it on the campaign trail. It's worth remembering that it was his launch speech where he announced that in Waco, Texas, where he made that the theme of his campaign. And in some ways, he's not wrong. Revenge is a powerful motivator. I love revenge. Most people do. I mean, it's toxic. It burns dirty, but it is a potent motivator. And a lot of people got behind that. And so they expected Trump to go out there and do a lot of things. His supporters are obviously upset because of the Epstein stuff. He hasn't done enough there. It plays out a lot in the right-wing media. It has certainly undermined a lot of the narrative support that he had, in sort of the places that came on, because they sort of got into this, or at least got excited. The kinetic energy came from him getting out there and talking about revenge and retribution and retaliation. And they don't think there's been enough of it. I mean, there was a bloodlust that was palpable during the campaign, and revenge was one of the embers that was fueling that. And it is a really significant appetite for his audience, and they're not getting it. So when you get these little flare-ups, that's where these proxy fights become so important for understanding what's happening in the psychology there. Is that what happened with Paxton and Cornyn? Yeah, Trump sort of knew where the winds were blowing, and he was sort of sitting on the sidelines, and he didn't really make a difference there. And there's something to sit with there, right? Because he points to this win as a sign of strength, and yet somehow says he doesn't care about the midterms. But let's just put that to the side for a second. The fight here. Cornyn did vote with Trump. He was a Trump supporter and an ally almost completely. And yet the vibes are off. The attitude was different. He wasn't in a scrum enough. I mean, the guy's building an arena for fighting on the White House lawn right now. His audience wants blood sports. They want fighting. And that is what Paxton does. And so this primary fight was a proxy, and in some ways, for that appetite and just a little taste. And it doesn't give them the larger audience the revenge they want, but they feel like they got a big win here. It's not about policy. It's not about governing. It is about these sort of side fights. But most of it is about revenge for Trump personally, and I think they're not sharing in the spoils of the corruption. They're not sharing in the spoils of the economy. Now they're not really sharing in the spoils of the revenge. They're going to want some more revenge.
So are these revenge fights? I'm thinking about the fact that Maine Senator Susan Collins, right? She voted to impeach the president in 2021, right? But she is the Republican nominee. She's the incumbent in Maine, but she's going to be in a tough fight. I think about Lisa Murkowski, who, again, someone else that has not always been in lockstep with the president, right? This would be post 2026. I'm thinking about Rand Paul, right? There are other folks. So does this revenge tour stop at the primary's edge?
Well, the primary is where Trump gets to exert the power that matters most to him, and that is having a Republican Party that comes to heel. Now, he is somewhat practical, believe it or not. I think the reason he hasn't had too much to say about Susan Collins in Maine is he understands that Maine is a blue state that votes for Democrats statewide, that hasn't voted for him for president. He seems to have accepted that, at least in Maine. And so he is listening to Republicans who have told him, this is the only way we hold this seat. Lay off her. We need your supporters to turn out for her. We need crossover Democrats to vote for her. We need independents to vote for her. But in red states like Texas, like Kentucky, like Alaska, the way he sees it is, these are states that I've won, and often with healthy margins. I shouldn't have to countenance any resistance to my agenda or my will. And I think that explains some of the different choices he's made in these primaries.
What is the strategy here? The former strategist in me, having the sitting president of the United States, who currently has the House and the Senate, right? Republicans have a trifecta, saying, I don't really care about the midterms, just seems quite unhelpful at a time when Republicans are literally fighting for their political lives in the House and, might I add, in the Senate.
And one thing I will say, too, is presidents don't normally make endorsements in primaries. They usually leave it up to primary voters. It's usually been an issue of unity. They try to stay out of it. President Trump revels in this, which is why I think he's going to be so tempted to do this again in 2028. But the primary that I am most watching is going to be the presidential primary for 2028. And, of course, you have both J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, likely presidential contenders. I am so interested to see how President Trump is going to be swayed in either direction. One misstep by either of them, he could easily flip his decision about who he endorses. And something that I noticed today is he went to Marco Rubio in that cabinet meeting to talk about Iran, even though Vice President Vance has played a very central role in that negotiation. And Vance was just talking about his leading this anti-fraud task force, and Rubio really led talking about Iran today.